Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle and thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com. Also, check us out at Sonic Cinema Patreon at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. The past month and going into this coming month will be a lot of coverage of the Atlanta Film Festival that is not necessarily available on Sonic Cinema. Including a lot of Q&As and different things throughout the festival. It's patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. We're continuing the Class of 1999 movie series for the podcast with not only the biggest box office hit of 1999, but also probably the most anticipated movie of our generation, or at least my generation. It is Star Wars Episode 1 Phantom Menace. And to discuss the film, I'm here joined once again by Ronnie Haynes and Daniel Green. Thank you very much for joining me.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for having us again.
So when I watched the movie, I don't know, about a month ago or so, it was a little over a month ago, I probably did not need to watch it again because I've seen it a ridiculous amount of times over the years.
How many times did you see in the theater?
Including 17.
Oh my God!
In theaters in 1999. That is not an exaggeration. It hit 20 when the 3D came out in 2012.
Oh God.
Yeah.
I forgot.
Needless to say,
Ryan, this is actually an intervention. I don't know if you.
I'm not exactly. I mean, you know, there are worse movies that could have been my most watched movie in theaters, but there are probably few that have aged this poorly. And we're here to talk about that, and we're here, and I know if you listen to our commentary that we did with David Miles, you'll hear Ron and mine's thoughts on the movies from 2003, 2004, whenever we recorded that. But it's good that this is the first time we've really discussed the prequels in the times that we've talked with Daniel on the podcast. So that's the big part that I'm really looking forward to discussing in his experience in watching Phantom Menace over the years and sort of getting his thoughts. Although, I mean, talking about the film in general will be pretty good for all three of us too, because I've certainly had big sea changes in my personal feelings about the movie and sort of what I see in the movie now compared to 20 years ago. So let's get started. Daniel, put us in the perspective of you as in your Star Wars fandom when Phantom Menace came out.
How old were you? You had to have been what, 10?
No, I would have been older. Yeah, well, I would have been 10, 11, something like that.
Yeah.
No. Let's say I was born in 87, so like 12, 13, something
Right.
like that. 12.
And me and Brian were around 2021, right?
Yeah. 20. I was going on 22, so. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because you're a smidge older than I am, but
yeah.
But yeah, so I think I was just like many Star Wars fans where, you know, you're excited because you finally got another movie. It's been, you know, a long, long time in the making at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was one of those geek nerds. I was collecting Star Wars already. And then, of course, Kenner, I think, is who had the Star Wars rights at the time. It was Kenner or Hasbro?
Kenner.
I think it was still Kenner.
Yeah.
But I collected all the action figures, you know, the little 4-inch action figures, every single one.
Mm-hmm.
They're actually hanging in my office closet on pegs, every single one. I collected all the little micro machine cars, the flying ships,
Mm-hmm.
and actually I recently gave this to my son as bribes for sleeping in his bed about a year ago. So, so the micro machines and the toy ships he has and has destroyed at this point, but a lot of the action figures I still have. They're hanging up in my closet, and so yeah, I was stoked. I will say, of course, we all know I'm a book reader. I read the book twice before I saw it in theaters. and I actually did not see it in theaters until it hit the Dollar Theater. I saw it over on what's the Dollar Theater over there on Roswell Road in Johnson's Ferry at the time. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So that was the first time I saw it. So it was way past its viewing, just because De Niro was tight in our house, so it wasn't easy to just take 3 kids and 2 adults to a movie. So I saw it twice in theaters, in the original theatrical release, and then I saw it 3 times under 3D release in 2012. I actually forgot all about that until you mentioned it. So, but no, my thoughts at the time: fantastic movie, loved it. There was obviously, Jar Jar Binks was quite obnoxious, and I'm sure we'll get to him later on.
Yeah.
So there were moments at that age where you're like, this is not as cool. But overall, really excited, loved it. Couldn't wait for the next one to come out. And like everybody says, it didn't age very well. I'm still one of the few that most Star Wars fans prefer 3, 2, 1. Actually, I prefer 1, 2, 3. So I'm sure we're going to discuss that in more detail. But the biggest thing was I like to see the youngness, the naiveness of Anakin, and how he was so helpful, generous, giving, and how he turned into, he wanted everything, power and all, to save his people he loved. Also, I like how the politics in the movie directly correlate with politics nowadays in terms of how stuff doesn't ever get done. And so just to see, kind of put a different type of perspective, and things at that age. I didn't think about the politics and how it worked then. Now being 32 years old, you're like, wow, that's our politics now. So it's so seeing how corrupt the system is. You can see how the Empire took over. Basically changed the Republic into the Empire. How it's so easy to manipulate, to gain all that power, to just plant seeds of doubt and darkness throughout the trilogies and even into the books that are in between and all. So So I enjoyed it. I still enjoy it. In terms of for me, it's 1, 2, 3. But yeah, it did not age well at all. It's very poorly written, directed, acted. It's sad that Liam Neeson has not been in too many terrible movies. That this is by far, in my books, his worst movie that he's been in. The saving grace, I think, was that Ewan McGregor is actually not that bad considering how young he was and the role that he has as Obi-Wan.
Yeah, what he was given to work with. Yeah,
I'm sure we all all agree that Jake Lloyd was not the best choice. That there were many other actors that had a better potential Anakin actor. So
well, I loved that. I really loved the behind the scenes documentary that came with the DVD.
The
beginning. And there's actually a really interesting part where they're casting Anakin, and it's down to a couple kids, and they're testing with Natalie Portman. And it's clearly the other 2 kids in question are clearly so much better than Jake Lloyd, and you're just sitting there just watching the process and watching this casting unfold, and I don't know, like I don't know what anyone else was thinking when they saw that, but I don't know, that's just something that sticks out in my mind is because is the documentary is that's right around when DVDs were starting to become what they were.
And episode 1 was the first of the Star Wars movies to hit DVD. It was one of the big. It was one of the big signifiers that DVD was here to stay, because basically once Disney takes on Disney and Spielberg and Star Wars and stuff like that, once DVD had all those brands as like, we're going to commit to this, it's here to stay. And you're absolutely right. I mean, that is one of the most revealing things, is that there are a couple of other actors who clearly would have been better and more natural, but Jake Lloyd was chosen. And I mean, I think part of that might have ended up being because of the fact that Jake Lloyd had a little bit more name recognition. I mean, even though Lucas was self-financing through Lucasfilm, I mean, Fox basically just distributed the movie. I mean, I think him having I think for him having as many names that people might have recognized was probably a big thing. And I mean, I was, you know, I was like you, Daniel. I mean, I was a lunatic when it came to collecting episode one stuff. I wasn't a reader, so I didn't read the book, but like all the toys and stuff like that. Yeah, we got
I
all
told
that.
you I had the I went out and I got a couple of the action figures when they because
Mhm.
I remember like some of the news stories talking about the midnight release at Toys R Us of
Yeah.
the
Yep.
action figures and everything like that, and
Mhm.
God help me, I bought the Jar Jar Binks.
Well, and the thing
And I
is,
was like, and you just thought like this is going to be such a neat character, and he's
Yeah.
going to be so, and you know,
Mhm.
of course we all,
and and I was deep into my soundtrack love at this point. So I mean, I
as
bought the
as was I,
soundtrack.
yeah.
And of course, the soundtrack with the infamous spoiler of
Yeah, right.
Qui-Gon
Qui-Gon's
died,
funeral. Yep.
because it's Qui-Gon's funeral. It's like, oh gee, well, I guess he's dead. But yeah, I mean, and I read as soon as the reviews became the embargo on reviews came out, like I basically read every major one from like Roger Ebert to Peter Travers from Rolling Stone, Newsweek, Time, all of that stuff. I read them all because I wanted to know. It's weird because I wanted to know as much as possible about the movie going into it, and it's like I wouldn't do that now. Even later in the summer when like Blair Witch Project and Eyes Wide Shut and other stuff came out, it's like I didn't necessarily want to know as much as possible. But like with Star Wars, and I think it was because of the fact that it was the first new movie in so long, I wanted to know as much as I could.
As we all did, yeah.
And but so let's bring it back to the movie. And let's start with the crawl. Because and
Trade disputes.
but the thing is, the crawl still kind of gets me. I still like, I'm interested in what the crawl has to, the story that the crawl sets up. I think it's kind of an interesting idea, and it's like even 22 years old, I'm like, yeah, this is interesting. I can get behind this, and because of the fact
That was all of us. It was like, no, hold on.
it's like until the movie unfolds, that's when things start to fall apart. And it's like that crawl with the John Williams theme and all of that stuff. It's like, okay, I'm sold. You've got me. Fine, let's get started. And then when the movie starts, that's where things start to
No, it's with
get
it's with the very first line delivery. It's like with
Yeah.
the very first line exchange. You know,
Yeah,
it's like it's
basically.
when you start to say, "Oh my God, what is going on here?"
And I mean, the thing is, it's like I think a lot of people. I think part of the problem is I think one of the things that people, at least in mine and Ron's generation, and to a certain extent Daniel's generation, but I think more with our generation especially, because we were in our 20s when it came out, and so we grown up with Star Wars, like first generation growing up with Star Wars. I think part of the problem we had was, the idea that was directed towards kids. And I mean, the thing is,
Was it though? I mean, that's another interesting. That's another debate. That's another point of discussion that's been. It's like, was it?
I think. Well,
And
I think in the
you know where I'm coming from though.
I understand where you're coming from. I will say, I think
Was it? Sorry.
I think the fact that Anakin is a child in the movie, and Jar Jar is the character that he is in the movie, brings it into a place where it feels like it's.
I don't think that. I don't.
Feels like Lucas is trying to make a movie that resonates with kids.
Well, I mean,
even if the story is not necessarily something that would appeal to kids at all. Part of the problem with that, and part of the big thing that really
Well, I mean, New Hope was. I mean, you hear Lucas talk all the time about like, oh yeah, I want New Hope to be for kids, and like he wanted these. He was his focus was always young people, quote unquote, and like I'm just but it again. We were discussing this earlier, and we kept saying, no, we need to save it for the podcast. We need to save it for the podcast. Like like the fact that New Hope was kind of more by quote, for lack of a better committee, and the prequels were all about George Lucas being surrounded by yes men.
Yeah.
You know where I'm coming from with this.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what affected the quality more so than anything.
Well, and I think in a big part of it, and even I would recognize it in 1999, is that part of the problem with the prequels in general, but especially Phantom Menace, is the fact that it's written and directed by somebody who has not really been in either any of those positions in 20 years. Like, if he had been, like, if the movie had come out in, like, the late 80s or so, if he had started this in, like, the late 80s, I think that he might have been able to, you might have been able to see a stronger...
Yeah, but he was waiting for the technology to catch up to him. He was waiting for the technology to catch up to the story.
Yeah, okay.
And it's like, I'm sorry, I've heard of Lucas say that a million times. At this, we all have.
But I think that's what's interesting is he's waiting for technology to catch up to it, and for me, that's what I disliked as the prequels went on, is that there was more and more CGI, so it was less and less physical props.
That did not age at all.
No.
Less and less of actual interactions with your surroundings. It's more of there's a green screen back here.
Yeah.
There's Samuel L. Jackson, who's a great actor, but sucks in these trilogy.
Yeah, exactly.
That can't act because he's not interacting with anything but a green screen. So it's interesting that he's waiting for this technology to get better, but then he wastes the technology because he uses exclusively the technology as opposed to the traditional props and sets.
Right.
So.
And I mean,
and the whole trilogy looks like a freaking cutscene. We know this, but it's
I mean, and the thing is, it's like when one of the notes is I wrote down was I felt like this movie could have been called Star Wars Episode 1 Exposition. Because it's exclusively exposition. It's not. I don't feel like I don't feel like a story. And one of the issues is I feel like this is all prelude to more and something else happening later on. There's not really.
Yeah, why was Revenge of the Sith the best prequel? It's because it's the one where all the stuff that we've been waiting to happen actually happens.
And also, I think it boils down to the fact that by that point, George had written and directed. He had the other two prequels under his belt, so it was a little bit more. He was better equipped to be a director again.
That doesn't make Revenge of the Sith a good movie. It just makes it the best one.
Right.
That's
better acting for sure.
Yeah.
Compared to Phantom Menace, but to me, worse effects, and it kind of what drove me away from the movie is you watch it and it's so fake looking. Not to say Phantom Menace isn't fake looking either, because those green hills are totally not green hills on Naboo. Like, it's ridiculous, but yeah, it's all the original prequels. I think most Star Wars fans, we like to ignore them. They're not really Star Wars.
Yeah,
they're just there.
Talk about those.
So just like some people don't talk about the new trilogy, the sequels, and especially the Last Jedi. We won't mention any names or anything, Ronnie, but yeah.
We spent 2.5 hours on the last.
You had to go there, Daniel.
I did.
I mean, granted, we could have gone.
He had to go there.
Hour and a half more, but I'm inclined.
Goddamn Last Jedi. Sorry, what?
I'm inclined to table that discussion for what was before that the most controversial Star Wars movie.
Yep.
And I think I'm pretty. I think I'm pretty comfortable in saying that it was at the time the most controversial Star Wars movie. And it points to the struggle with making a prequel, where it's like, especially.
I mean, yeah, look at the Hobbit movies. As a
to be fair with the Hobbit movies, at least they were based on pre-existing text.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with the Hobbit movies is that
They were
expanded from the text too much.
Exactly, yeah.
That was the biggest problem.
Yeah.
The story they had is a really good story, and the book that Tolkien writes is a really good book. I mean,
but they turned one book into three
movies,
three massive movies,
2 at most.
Mm-hmm. Or just one really one. Yeah.
The better example, I think, as far as the fundamental problem with prequels is the Fantastic Beasts movies that they're doing for Hobbit, the Harry Potter franchise.
Neither of them I've seen, so
Same
but
never.
But
I really missing much.
I know, but I know from discussing them with you that
you're
like
not really missing much.
Yeah.
And supposedly a third one is on the way in 2 years, even though nobody really likes the second one.
But they're making money, and that's why they make them.
But really, the second one didn't make money. But anyway, the inherent problem with prequels is that you're leading up to an event that we already know. That's kind of the problem. It's like, Rogue One was perfect because it was so self-contained. Like, it's just about that one thing. So it's like you don't have to worry about anything else other than that one thing. And so Solo, you have some leeway as far as, okay, well, it's like they're trying to develop the character of Han Solo to where he will eventually be the same the person that you see in A New Hope, but you have some wiggle room in there to play with the character and to see how much he grows and where you take the character in that case. Those are good prequels in the Star Wars franchise.
Yeah, I mean they're
I think
they're problematic. I think Rogue One is probably. I mean,
I would say Rogue One is stronger than any of the prequels.
Yeah, no. I mean, like that's the thing. Like, no, Rogue One and Solo are entertaining and well made, and I mean, not that they're not problematic, but they're not perfect. But they're clearly better than.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the biggest problem with the Star Wars prequels, and especially Phantom Menace, is not only the fact that George Lucas was 20 years removed from his last time being in the director's chair, but also the fact that it felt like, while it's obvious he had a very clear end game to the story, I feel like the first 2 parts of getting to that end game in Revenge of the Sith are, I feel like it feels like they were sort of pieced together by ideas without really being completely thought through.
Well, of course, yeah.
And I think the problem
there's very much a sense throughout all of those movies that Lucas was basically making it up as he went along. And
I think if he sat down and wrote 1, 2, 3 and then filmed 1, 2, 3, kind of like what they're doing with Avatar, hopefully it turns out good. But sitting down, writing it all, you have the full story, you have what you want, you have the pieces together, and then going back and filming it, I think that would have done a lot better, because you would have sat down and seen how many useless scenes are in the Phantom Menace that you don't need, and how many useless scenes are also in Attack of the Clones. Though granted, the one thing I do like about Attack of the Clones is because we didn't talk, the movie ends with the Clone Wars starting per se, and then we have the fantastic cartoon, The Clone Wars, which kind of answers so many questions and elaborates so much more that you never could have done in a movie, much less a trilogy of its own. So it feels like a lot of 1 and 2 was just garbage material that we didn't need. Some of it was nice, having the backstory, understanding how corrupt things were. But there's so many scenes that were like the pod racing scene. Like, what do we need a pod racing scene? Okay, the starship got hit. They had to land on Tatooine. Republic credits aren't accepted. So how do we swindle our way out of this one?
And the thing is, it's like that. All of that, and you're absolutely right. And all of that points to some of my biggest issues with the movie watching it again, and one of my issues, and some of my issues with the prequels in general. What my issues with the prequels in general have always been, and the main one for me is the fact that Anakin is a kid in Phantom Menace. And because of the fact that, you know, you have Natalie Portman's character as Padme, I mean, she's obviously going to be the female lead in this trilogy, and thus, you know, it's implied that, you know, in 2 and 3, as we see, she's going to be, you know, the mother of Luke and Leia. The fact that there's the age difference that there is in Phantom Menace has always been rather uncomfortable, because it's like, if you look at Padme after they leave, even when they're on Tatooine, when she's dealing with whenever she's with Anakin, it feels very
Motherly.
It feels very maternal.
Yeah.
And she's almost his surrogate mother when he's left, when he's taken from his actual mother. And then in the next episode, they're supposed to be lovers. It's like, yeah, that's a big. I mean, I understand there's a time difference between the two movies, but it's like, yeah, that's a bit creepy.
Yeah, I think the age gap thing. So you know, he was 10, if I'm not mistaken, in the movie, and she's 16 because she's
14.
youngest elected.
She's 14. I believe.
Yeah, I think
14?
I think she was 14.
I'm pretty
Okay.
sure
Yeah,
she's
I
supposed
think
to be
was
14.
Yeah, I think so. So I mean, it's in age, it's not that different.
It's just that they're so young at that point. Because nowadays, you know, it's not unusual that, you know, the wife can be older than the husband. You know, it's not that uncommon anymore, like now. But at that age, that they're literally both kids.
Yeah.
But he's so much younger, quote unquote, feeling at that, you know, age. That I feel like if it was one of those, like, she was 18 or 19 and he was like 14 or 15, it may not have been as bad.
Or even if he was like 12. Like, and part of the reason why him being a kid for me doesn't really work in this story is the fact that the idea of him being too old to be trained.
Yeah.
It's like in episode 2 we see the younglings.
Yeah, and they're not
basically the same age as Anakin is in this one.
Yeah, they're maybe a couple years younger.
Wasn't the idea that like babies are like, if they're like, it's kind of it's addressed a little bit in that scene with Shmi and Qui-Gon is like,
it is.
Like if babies are born under the quote unquote under the Republic, and they're
identified as more sensitive and
from birth. That's the idea. So the younglings in episode 2 have been they've been training them since birth, essentially.
Right. Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, I understand in Empire Strikes Back, like, why Yoda is hesitant to train Luke because of, quote unquote, being too old, because he's a young adult. Of course he is.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. But yeah, I mean, that's, and even though they do explain it in that scene, and even though, yes, you understand it in the context of that scene, it's like, I mean, is that really the only reason that you're, so hesitant to train him? And it's like, really, that's the best you could come up with, or is that the best that you want to try to admit to? I mean, they hint at the fact that it's like, in their questioning of Anakin in that scene, that it's like, oh yeah, I'm not quite sure how I feel about this kid for a lot of different reasons that have to do with the prophecy, the Chosen One prophecy, and all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's like when they confront Qui-Gon again, and it's like, and Obi-Wan is even saying, "Oh, he's too old." It's like, really? Is he?
Is he really?
Is he too old? That's always been kind of my biggest issue with episode 1 in particular, and the fact that in episode 2 it's like Padme and Anakin are supposed to be lovers, or this love story is supposed to start between them. and
Oh,
it
that
started
goddamn
off
love
in
story.
a very different way.
That love story is still why episode 2 is my least favorite prequel, but
Yeah, it wasn't a natural for sure. But so one of the things that always interests me too about Phantom Menace
Okay, we're good.
Okay.
is that so this prophecy of the chosen one, right? Okay, so we look at the original trilogy. There's nothing that's ever mentioned about a prophecy of a chosen one,
Right.
nothing like that, right?
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden, boom! Here in episode 1, there's this prophecy of the chosen one magically there, right? And so it's so weird. And then if we think about it, so
What
the
was it
Jedi
with-
Knights were there for guardians of peace for 1,000 generations, and there's only 2 Sith, according to Rule of 2 by Bane.
Yeah.
There's only 2 Sith. So the prophecy of the chosen one is never described ever. Other Qui-Gon's interpretation is he's going to bring balance to the Force. So let's think about this for a moment. There's thousands of Jedis for thousands of generations,
Right.
and there's 2 Sith. So
Yeah.
if we're bringing balance to the Force, does that mean we got to kill all these Jedi to level the playing field? So
Well, and-
it's never explained, like, what is the prophecy? What is this chosen
Well, see,
one?
that's one of the things that I like about Revenge of the Sith, because of the fact that you have like Yoda and Mace Windu talking about the prophecy, and Yoda's the one questioning. It's like the prophecy could have been misread,
Right.
meaning like, well, are we sure we're interpreting this prophecy? Because you're absolutely right. It's like, really, if you're going to bring balance, then the Jedi need to be almost extinguished
Right.
in order to do that. And so, really, but I kind of and the thing is, ultimately, I kind of understand why, to a certain extent, I understand why the prophecy is not necessarily brought up in the original trilogy. And
I think it's because Lucas didn't even know at the time
he
that
didn't think about the fact that he was
Right.
going to be able to make those movies at the time.
yeah.
So, I mean, I have no doubt that he wrote some basic structure for
Well, yeah.
everything before that. Of course he did, but I don't think he thought about the fact that it's like, oh, well, it's like, and the original trilogy doesn't lose anything for it not being mentioned.
Mm.
And I mean, that's one of the things about prequels. It's like prequels is going to fill in the blanks of all of these things that happen in the original trilogy and give them more context, more meat on the bones. And part of the problem with these particular prequels is that some of the choices are not really that great. And I mean,
Right.
and it's putting it in that's putting it mildly to a certain extent. But at the same time, I mean, I don't have a problem with this being more politically minded than the original trilogy was. I don't mind it being basically, because I mean, part of the thing that
It's all an execution though. That's what
Yeah,
that's
the
that's
execution is the problem.
is absolutely the problem, and that's
Yeah.
why it's so boring and it's not interesting at all. I mean, like, and I'm gonna babble on until somebody erupts me, but yeah, it's like, yeah, no, again, it's all execution independent,
Yeah.
and that's the thing is like that's why at least Force Awakens worked as well as it did, is because I mean, yes, it's a lot of, in many ways it's kind of a rehash of New Hope, but at the same time it's like we were just so glad to see a Star Wars movie done that well after so long, after the
Yeah.
the
Well,
prequels.
It was also made by. I mean, it was also made by filmmakers who, like, they
cared.
not
Or
just-
well, yeah,
just-
not to say that George Lucas doesn't care.
Right. And I think to a certain extent he did by this point. I mean, but I also think there's a certain Malcolm that just wanted the series done. I
Mhm.
think he did legitimately want the franchise to be over, so maybe he could move on to something else.
Mm-hmm. To make those smaller,
well, I mean,
weirder,
what was-
independent movies that like he keeps talking about that we haven't
and
seen.
One of the things that was what I was getting at when it came to Force Awakens is one of the biggest problems I have with the prequel, the Phantom Menace in particular, is that it's very clearly the work of a filmmaker who hasn't made a film in 20 years. And J.J. Abrams, Lawrence Kasdan, all of them, they clearly have been working on a pretty regular clip.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like they have that confidence of writers and directors who they basically, they know what they're doing. They have a very clear vision of what they're doing and what they know they need to do as filmmakers to make it work. Now there are other reasons why Phantom Menace works or Force Awakens works better than the prequels. Part of it is the way that they blend practical effects back into it more, as opposed to overwhelming it with CGI. But part of it is just natural storytelling momentum. And I mean, that's one of the things that Lucas is lacking.
Plus, with Abrams, you're going to get the emotion. You're going to get the action. You're going to get the story. You're going to get all those great elements that, again, execution-wise, we didn't get with the prequels, particularly Phantom Menace.
Yeah, and one thing I do want to talk about as far as the prequels is when I watched it. When I watched it for the first time, it's like it was the culmination of a really long day for me. So I had a hard time staying awake. But I mean, I knew I was going to see it the next day also. So
you saw it was midnight shows, right? Yeah.
But I knew I was also going to see it the next day. So it's like, okay, but I was still extremely tired. The thing that struck me this last time watching it was, and this actually ties into a film that I just talked about for the podcast a few months ago, Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate, which is one of the most notorious flops in movie history. That is a 3.5-hour movie. It's very episodic in the way it goes about its business. It tells a very clear story. It tells a straightforward narrative, but it's very episodic in the way it goes about its business. There's not really a scene that you would take out of the movie, but the problem is it doesn't necessarily know how to get in and out of scenes efficiently for a strong piece of storytelling. And when I was watching Phantom Menace, I was struck by how much I feel the exact same way about this. I think it moves it moves from scene to scene the way it should. But there are some times where the scene's a little too short. There are some scenes where it's way too long. It goes on way too long and lingers a little too much on things that it doesn't need to linger on. But it doesn't really work as much as it wants to work as a full-blown piece of storytelling. It doesn't. What
did Ben Burtt? Because Ben Burtt edited this as well as did this, as well as the sound. Yeah. What did Ben Burtt edited prior to this? Do we know?
That's a good question.
I was gonna say that's just now occurring to me.
Yeah.
Because I mean, again, that's something else that stands out to me in the documentary. Is Ben Burtt discussing the editing with Lucas, particularly towards the end? The climax, the battle at the end. I mean, does anyone else remember? Okay. For those of you at home, Brian's checking his IMDb on his iPhone.
So it looks like most of what Ben Burtt had done as far as editing was the Adventures of Young Indiana Jones.
Okay.
So he had worked with Lucas in that capacity as the editor.
So
yeah,
that's basically his other big.
And Young Indiana Jones wasn't that great of a show to begin with.
So basically, George Lucas got a yes sir, yes sir, yes sir editor.
Yeah.
In addition to Rick McCollum, who is basically yes man.
Oh God, the biggest yes man. Like you watch him and you watch Rick McCallum in any of those behind the scenes material and any of the prequels, and it's just like it's.
I mean,
I mean, like I loved it. I loved his enthusiasm. I loved watching Rick McCallum's enthusiasm throughout the making of the prequels. But yeah, it's so clear that like he's just again, I guess, man, that's something else. That's something I'm sure we're gonna touch on more. But yeah, it's so Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I hate the idea of calling Ben Burtt a yes man because of the fact that his sound design work is so essential to the Star Wars saga in general. He goes back to the original.
What's interesting about the behind the scenes material is Ben Burtt's one of the people you see actually speaking up to Lucas about, hey, there's some problems here. Yeah. If you remember any of that stuff, Ben Burtt's one of the few guys who's actually addressing these things with Lucas, addressing the fact that like the climax, the final battle is problematic because there are so many elements. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, and I would counter with him though that it's like it's not that I think that I don't think that the climax is problematic because there are too many elements, because the fact of the matter is it's basically a mirror of the 3 layers of storytelling that Return of the Jedi had at the end.
Yeah.
But the problem with the climax is, well, the biggest problem with the climax, and I mean, I know we're jumping through it. We haven't even really gotten into the story, but the biggest problem with the climax for me, especially when it comes to the space stuff and on Naboo and all that stuff, so much of it is based on coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
It's coincidence dressed up as fate.
Right.
Like, you know, especially with Anakin getting into a spaceship, accidentally going into space, and crash landing exactly in the place that he needs to be in front of, that needs to be destroyed.
Yeah,
I'll try spinning. That's a good trick.
Yeah. I mean, okay,
it's like pod racing.
And sure, like the will of the Force. Okay, yeah, it's the will of the Force. Nah, it's just lazy screenwriting.
Yeah.
Oh God!
Like, how many times do you jump in a plane and it's on autopilot?
Yeah.
Or you jump in a car and it's on cruise control. You have to put it on autopilot. You have to put it. And how is autopilot automatically going to the mothership up there that you got to go fight and destroy? Like it's just it doesn't. There's so much stuff that doesn't make sense.
No,
or I have the high ground. Obi-Wan did not have the high ground. He was about to fall in a pit, but he jumps over Darth Maul and slices him in half. Darth Maul had an opportunity to slice him in half as he was jumping up. It's just like, isn't that what Obi-Wan did to Anakin in Revenge of the Sith?
Yeah.
So it's just
and the thing is like it's one of the most frustrating things about it is that there are interesting things in this movie. I will always believe that. I will always feel that way about this movie. There are interesting things about this movie. The problem is the execution. The problem is the way they're put together. The best performance in this entire movie is Pernilla August as Shmi Skywalker. She is the one actor, and it's funny because I just watched her in another famous movie she's in, Ingmar Bergman's Fanny and Alexander. And she is wonderful in this movie. Like, she makes me believe every corny ass line of dialogue that George Lucas gives her. And it's like the best scene in this entire movie is when her and Anakin, it's the best acting Jake Lloyd does in the entire movie. When they're saying goodbye to one another before he goes off with Qui-Gon. And the way John Williams scores that scene, everything about it, it's the most natural acting I feel like Jake Lloyd does in the movie. And Pernilla August is wonderful in the movie. Like, she is fantastic in the movie. It's a shame that she only had one brief scene where she's dying in Attack of the Clones. I mean, it's kind of understandable that she only had one scene in Attack of the Clones, but at the same time, it's a shame because she does such good work in Phantom Menace. But yeah, I mean, there's so much there's so much about this movie. I mean, so much of it revolves around Anakin, as far as this idea of coincidence that's dressed up as fate. Like, oh, Qui-Gon and company happened to land on Tatooine, who happened to run into Anakin Skywalker, who happens to be the creator of C-3PO, which makes no sense whatsoever other than just pure fan service. Like, I mean, I guess part of it is supposed to show his technical brilliance as a character, and the fact that he can do things, that most other kids his age aren't necessarily capable of doing. But you already have pod racing to show that. Like, I feel like if C-3PO had been in Coruscant as like a protocol droid helping, with Senator Palpatine, I think that would have been much more interesting. As opposed to
the stuff on Coruscant is a whole other discussion. That's whether or not that's actually any of that's even the least bit interesting. I mean,
I think and I think it should be more interesting than it is.
Oh, yeah.
And
That's the whole movie in a nutshell, right? It should be more interesting than it is. That's the whole freaking movie in a nutshell.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, Coruscant, the stuff on Coruscant is without probably the most boring part of the movie, without question. I mean,
what did we're talking a little bit about Anakin Skywalker. What did everybody else think of the pod race? I mean, it was hyped up so much going into the movie. I mean, if you're familiar with films at all, I mean, it's basically lifted from the chariot race of Ben-Hur. What did you think of the pod race then, and how do you feel about it now?
Well, I don't know. That's the thing again. I remember being at the time, even though the more I watched it, the more problematic the movie became to me.
Right.
The pod race at the time was still a highlight. Because it was interesting from a visual standpoint. It was interesting and exciting, sound. Ben Burtt goes to town with the sound and that and I love that, there's not a lot of music, it's kind of like in a way it's like a lot of the lightsaber battles that they rely more so on sound than they do the music and everything. I thought that was, for a lot of reasons, the pod race at the time when the movie came out was a highlight. But then again, like so many other aspects of this movie, through multiple viewings, it does not age well at all. And again, I was watching episode 1 this evening before we got together, and the pod race came on, and I was just so not enthralled at all, and it was just and I was just sitting there like a deflated balloon, just not enthralled, and not again, I'm noticing all the elements that I thought were interesting at first, like the sound, the no music, the the visuals. I mean, that is one of the parts where some of the CGI is a little bit better used, I think.
Yeah.
But again, there's just so many. There's not enough in that sequence to help the movie still.
So for me, it's one of those. So like I said already, I read the book twice before I ever saw the movie. And in the book, actually, I enjoyed it. Like, I loved it. It's very descriptive. And you're imagining it, because keep in mind, I haven't seen the movie.
Yeah.
I've seen some images and stuff like that. There was a lot of Time magazines and TV guides back when we had those.
Yeah.
Like, there was images and all. So you had an idea, but you're making it up as you're reading it in your mind. So you have this whole elaborate sequence going on. It's a desert planet, but there's all these caves and rock formations and everything you're avoiding. And so, to me, actually, the first time I saw it, I was pretty let down. From the overall visual aspect, actually, the sound, like Ronnie said, was fantastic. The way he develops the different noises for the engines for each pod was fantastic. And even it just like the flying by and going past you kind of thing, it was just fantastic the whole way. But just I felt like the whole visual aspect of it, and going back to we know how this trilogy is going to end because we know where the next trilogy begins. Like, well, we know how this pod racing was going to end. We know that Anakin was going to win. We know, so it
no drama.
It took away from it. But then the other thing that I look on and like, well, this doesn't make any sense at all. Is so are you telling me that every single one of those pod racers were force sensitive? Because if Anakin do it and it's so dangerous and so uncontrollable, or in terms of how quick it is and how quick you have to be able to react. So are you telling me that all these people were like force sensitive people, or are we just saying that Anakin is that much better than all these other people? Like, or has to, excuse me, not that much better, but he has to have the force to be better than these regular people. Like, I don't know. I felt like there was a big disconnect there between he's a force user. You have to have Jedi skills to fly pods. It's very fast or very dangerous, as Qui-Gon says. But here's all these other random characters that are doing it that aren't force sensitive as far as we know, and
I don't think that was ever. I mean, that's an interesting point. I don't think that was ever the intent.
Yeah, I don't either.
I think it's the fact that like I think the idea was that this is primarily kind of like a thing that's done by professionals.
It's basically. I mean, let's face it. It's basically car racing.
Yeah,
that's
it's
exactly what it is.
In space.
That's
what it is.
Yeah.
It's basically NASCAR.
So this goes back to the bad writing of George Lucas, though, because Qui-Gon says, it's very fast, it's very dangerous. You have to have the force abilities to do it to be able to react.
I think the idea is you have to be if you want to do this, if a human wants to do this.
Jedi abilities to do it, I think, is specifically like that.
Yeah, but I think it's like I think the idea is if you want to be if you're a human and you want to do this, you want to be a force sense.
And especially if you're a kid.
Yeah.
I could get the kid part of it, but it's and I guess part of it's from reading books. Even in canon legends, Han Solo sets up a racing on one of the planets, and everybody races, humans and all. Now they're racing spaceships through space and obstacles, but everybody's doing it, from aliens to to humans, and they're not force sensitive. So it just it goes back to bad writing from George Lucas. That was a line that Qui-Gon didn't necessarily have to have.
Right.
That didn't really serve a point, but it does change the entire context of the racing scene if you look at that line that Qui-Gon says, and you have to focus on here's a kid that is force sensitive that's doing it. So what are all these other creatures and characters? So it changed the dynamics dramatically. That scene.
It's one of those things where it's like George Lucas almost. Okay, I think we're still good. It's almost like George Lucas put himself into a narrative trap that he didn't intend himself to be in by Qui-Gon's line, and it's sort of the same thing with Anakin being too young to be a Jedi and all of that to be trained at this point and all of that stuff. It's like, well, but you. So what does that mean? For the pod race, what does that mean for the other, for the other racers? For Anakin, well, he's too young, and yet you have the younglings who are at least his age who are being trained, or younger being trained. And it's like, again, he establishes that in the scene with Qui-Gon and Shmi, but I mean, it's one of those things where it's like he was just, he didn't really. It's one of those moments where you kind of wish he had self-edited a little bit more, or again had somebody to play off, to bounce ideas off of, like a Lawrence Kasdan
or Gary Kurtz,
but especially somebody in the Rang side.
Yeah.
Who might have been able to go, well, can we figure out a way to make this a little bit more succinct? I mean, that's one of the biggest things that Lawrence Kasdan brings to the original trilogy, even Jedi, where it's like he's somebody to bounce ideas off of for Lucas, as opposed to just somebody who's going to say, "Oh yeah, that's the idea."
Yeah.
Um,
The,
yeah, I
o-
mean,
the only prequel that had a co-writer was Attack of the Clones, right?
yeah,
And it was some guy that we did that again had worked on Young Indie Chronicles, I think.
yeah, and I think he had also I think he had also worked on. I know. I think he'd worked with Coppola at some point. So I mean, I want to say I don't think it was Apocalypse Now, but may have been. But I think he worked with Coppola at some point. So it was somebody familiar with Lucas. But yeah, I mean, but part of the problem there is that I mean, arguably, we're talking about writing issues with Phantom Menace. Attack of the Clones has just as many in terms of the way it develops its story, especially the love story between Padme and Anakin.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that is really it's one of those things where it's like you just don't really you don't feel like he has strong grasp on how to write this after so long.
Mm-hmm.
My personal feelings on the pod race, it's like I basically will echo what you guys said, where it's like it feels very inevitable. Like it feels like I jokingly said it tonight while you were watching it, Ron. It's like, oh hey, the thing that we fully expected to happen happened. Look at that. I agree with you. The sound design, this has been Bird's finest hour in the movie. I mean, there are other great sequences as far as the sound design, but that's the one that really stands out because of the way he builds the engines and the pod racing sounds and the way the surround mixes work is just fantastic.
Please tell me this was at least nominated for Best Sound Design. Was it?
It was. It was nominated for visual effects, sound, and sound design. All three of which it lost to The Matrix. And
another science fiction space Jesus story.
Which I just discussed with somebody else for this series. And it's interesting because of the fact that it's like I always resented. I mean I've had my own issues with The Matrix for a long time, but I always resented those wins against the Phantom Menace, but thinking about it now, I still kind of feel like Phantom Menace probably should have won sound design or sound editing, but like especially visual effects, it's like, yeah, I get why The Matrix won.
Yeah,
I get why The Matrix won. The overall sound mix, yeah, I get why The Matrix won. Yeah, it was pretty good. But I still have issues with The Matrix. Not as many.
We know, Brian. We know.
Not as many as I used to. I mean, I like it more now than I used to, but I arguably have more issues with Phantom Menace now than I did with The Matrix then, which I never expected to say 20 years ago. But and the thing is, it's like there's so much that I will say before we put to bed the discussion of the pod race, I do have to say one of my favorite moments of this movie will always remain the sand people shooting
target practice.
That's the one moment of humor that actually works for me in this movie. It's genuinely funny and crazy, and I know it's just a throwaway to get the sand people in here, but it's like, you know what? I kind of love that. And the way they're so proud of themselves for shooting at him. But yeah. So that's
I like the quick cut to the Jawas. Houdini!
Yeah.
Like that all that random stuff is like,
we've mentioned John Williams a bit in terms of the pod race for the lack of music until the very end. This I will always go about for this score as one of the best in the series. I think Anakin's theme is not used enough. I think now, I mean, part of it is because of the fact that it evolves into a love theme, and then eventually you have the Imperial March in Revenge of the Sith that comes into play. but Anakin's theme, which was one of the main themes that he introduced in this movie, is just it has always been one of my favorite pieces from a Star Wars score. And this has always been one of my favorites. I love the way he uses percussion in the battle scenes and the pod race, and the way he builds tension in this.
Or attempts to build tension, at least.
I think John Williams does really well building tension as much as he can with what he's given.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Well. I mean,
and I think he's also doing what I think he also does relatively well as far as building emotion as much as he can with what he's given. I love, one of my favorite pieces of music has always in this score has always been. I talked about the scene with Anakin and Shmi saying goodbye. That's a beautiful piece of music by Williams. But one of my favorites has always been when they're in the Gungan city and they're in front of Boss Nass shortly after they meet Jar Jar, and like Qui-Gon uses the Jedi mind trick to get Boss Nass to let him go, and Jar Jar they get to take Jar Jar with them, and that piece of music is one of those things that doesn't necessarily it doesn't exactly stand out, but I feel like it's got a lot going on, and it goes into the underwater scenes where they end up going to Naboo. You have the two giant monster attacks and stuff like that, which are silly and kind of stupid.
Coincidence again? There's always a bigger fish. I'm like, really?
But it's one of those things where it's like Williams is just so good, and I feel like there's especially felt like with his music, especially in the prequels, even in the sequel trilogy, but especially in the prequels, it's like he was really excited to be able to revisit this world again and expand on what he had done previously.
Yeah, to me, I would agree that this is probably one of his finest, of the Star Wars saga so far. We get, there's moments in the other movies where, there's really good, like in Attack of the Clones, I like Zam Weasley, the assassin piece, he throws in a guitar, that's the first time. And
I've always loved that.
Yeah,
too.
I mean, I had that one on repeat like forever when it came out, and Across the Stars was a great love piece as far as considering how bad the love story is, like that piece was fantastic.
Yeah.
But the Phantom Menace, and I specifically like the deluxe edition, the 2 disc set where it literally has all the stuff. And Duel of the Fates.
I had that. Yeah.
I think to me, Duel of the Fates, and I think most Star Wars fans, Duel of the Fates is a fantastic one. But I just think it's the way that piece builds the emotion, because we know that Qui-Gon's gonna die because we saw the leak of the trailer or the title, Qui-Gon's funeral. But it's kind of the how he dies. It's a really well choreographed, actually, fight sequence and sound and all. But it's really the music that builds up that emotion of, he's gonna die, but you weren't expecting it the way it happened, and it built up to it, and so it's in Duel of the Fates. It's not just the fight scene there. It goes on throughout the space battle, the land battle in Naboo. So it's just well used and written for all 3 aspects. The space battle and the land battle and the Jedi Sith fighting. But yeah, it is to me. It's my favorite soundtrack for sure of his. From beginning to end, it's all of it's good. There's not one piece in there that I don't like.
Yeah.
Where some of the other movies, there's pieces in there. You didn't need that, or that's not necessarily the best written, or they maybe could have done something better for this sequence. But I think beginning to end, this was definitely his finest hour so far that we have. And I hope that the Rise of Skywalker, being that it's the last in the series and probably the last that John Williams will probably write for any. Well, but no, just like for any movie, because he's getting to the age now where he's already talking about retirement sort of thing. So this could very well be his last written piece of music for anything. I kind of hope he goes with a bang. Maybe
I think he'll work with Spielberg as long as he can. I really think he'll work with Spielberg.
I think so too. Yeah.
I mean, and the fact of the matter is, like the past 20 years, I mean, it's basically been Spielberg or Star Wars.
Right. Yeah.
Like it really. I mean, he's worked with other filmmakers, obviously, and a lot of them are filmmakers he had worked with previously. But for the most part, it has been basically Star Wars or Spielberg with him. And I mean, yeah, I think he'll, because that relationship with Spielberg has been so ongoing over the years. It is going to be interesting to see how many more scores he has left him, because his health has been not great over the past few years.
Yeah, he did have a health scare recently, didn't
he? Yeah.
And so it's, I mean, I know Spielberg's next film is going to be West Side Story, so I mean, he's not going to be writing anything for that. They're still threatening us with Indiana Jones 5 so in a couple of years, so maybe. Right. But yeah.
And Alan Silvestri did Ready Player One, so.
But that was part of that was because of the fact that John Williams
was doing
needed him to do the post more than Ready Player One. So I think having Alan Silvestri on Ready Player One was a better choice anyway, given the narrative. I think I think his sensibilities were probably better for than Spielberg than Williams was. But
are we getting off track?
Well, we're talking about John Williams.
Okay,
we're still talking about John Williams.
Okay,
John Williams is Star Wars.
Yes, that's very true.
You know,
but
to Daniel's point, it's almost like John Williams is telling the story that George Lucas wants to. You know, it's obvious that John Williams knows the story that Lucas is trying to tell, and he's trying to tell it.
Right.
But
that's the thing. I'm with you guys and like thinking like Phantom Menace is a very underrated score.
Yeah.
You know, but clearly Williams deserves better than what he got. You know.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
I think we all said. I know Brian did this, and I know I did this. We bought the soundtrack the day it came out, a couple weeks prior to the movie actually coming out. And you know, I listened. That's right around when I was starting to get into soundtracks as well.
Yeah.
Like my very first one was Jurassic Park.
Oh, I had already been mad about soundtracks by this point. Like I was already.
Well, yeah. Well,
I was getting like as many soundtracks before the movie as I could. That's how crazy I was.
Yeah.
But especially if it was a composer like John Williams. I mean, you know.
No, I have very vivid memories of at least. Well, yeah, John Williams was like my first exposure to this interest of in soundtracks. You know, I have very vivid memories of sitting in the, you know, when I was really little, sitting in the tub listening to Star Wars on a cassette tape or what. Anyway, so yeah, but and then Jurassic Park came along, and I bought that. I was like, oh, this is really powerful, and like I'm like this could vary this, and it developed into what is my favorite kind of music now. Like you, and like that's what you and I bonded over big time when we first started really discussing film. Is like I was like oh my god, the music, you love the music too, So anyway, but yeah, no, that's my take on it. Is that's my hot take on the score anyway. Is that it is one of Williams' best. It's one of the best in the series, but it's just so bogged down by the movie that it's supporting that it's hard for that not to affect my feelings on the overall thing.
So getting away from the music, talking about other aspects of the movie. Who would you guys say we learned who are the characters would you say that we learned the most about as characters? regardless of screen time, regardless of how strong the performance is.
Watto. That's my answer. No, I know because we were watching this earlier,
Yeah.
and I said, I was basically like, I think Watto's my favorite character, and like,
Why is he your favorite character?
because I don't know, he's somehow to me the most nuanced. He's somehow to me the most interesting. Again, you said regardless of screen time.
I did.
And I was,
Okay.
and because I'm gonna touch on something really quick. I'm not gonna try to dwell on it too much, Brian, because I know like I've tried talking to you about the Red Letter Media
Yeah.
Mr. Plinkett reviews.
Yes.
Have you heard of these, Daniel?
No,
Okay,
no.
these are these epic 2 hour a personality online called Mr. Plinkett reviews and breaks down the Star Wars prequels in a really interesting way, and he does it in the character of what's his name from Silence of the Lambs, the killer in Silence of the Lambs.
Lecter.
No.
Buffalo Bill.
Buffalo Bill.
Here.
No, I'm not kidding. I know it sounds ridiculous.
It does sound really.
But it's so interesting the way he does it. Okay, it's basically Buffalo Bill analyzing the Star Wars prequels, and I've loved these. If you're listening, I know Marv loves these. So Brian, don't zone out on me. Don't zone out on me. I know.
I watched 5. I swear I watched like 5 minutes of one. The first one for Fan Mess.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't get over the voice, and
I know.
I couldn't watch anymore.
I know you could. I'm saying again. I know.
To your point, sir.
Okay, I'm sorry, but I'm just saying that one of the really interesting things this review does, the Mr. Plinkett review does, is he interviews different people I think on the street or something like that, and he's like, "What do you remember about what can you tell me about Han Solo?" Like, well, he's a rogue, he's a rebel, blah 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 blah, and he goes, "Okay, good. What can you tell me about Qui-Gon Jinn?" And it's like crickets. It's like he's stoic, and he's a Jedi, I guess, and it's like, and you get the point he's trying to make, and again, it's done in a really interesting way. But I'm not going to go. That's all I'm going to say about the Plinkett reviews. But yeah, I'm just saying, like, Watto is Watto is the one that stands out to me the most in terms of like nuance, in terms of like the way he's done. You guys are cringing over there. It's like,
no, I mean because I wasn't quite sure that was a surprising answer.
Yeah,
that was a surprising answer to me. Now that you've mentioned it, okay, that's a very fair point.
Like again, like you look at some of the his animation, I mean, again, a lot of the CGI does not hold up, but it's I don't know, like again, you look at the work that's being done on Jar Jar versus the work that's being done on Watto. There is some more nuance. Again, I'm using that word a lot, I know, but there is some more nuance with Watto. You can kind of see the wheels turning a little bit more with that character. I don't know. There's just something behind the animation of that character that and again, the overall execution that just makes him, I think, the most interesting character to me. Anyway, go ahead.
So for me, I would have there's 3 characters, but 2 of them play together in terms of developing each other. But I'd start with Senator Palpatine. Just he doesn't have a lot of airtime, right? He's very small. He has a small sequence at the beginning when the hologram gets cut out because the invasion's going on, and then we don't meet him again until Coruscant. But the small interaction we have with the little dialogue we have, you can see how very cunning and manipulative he is. To kind of place the seeds of doubt in Padme's ear about, now this is where you'll see, who has the Chancellor's ear, if you will, and how long it's going to take for us to send a negotiation or send to see what's going on in Naboo is actually going on, and by that time our people will be dead and starved, that sort of stuff. So just the way he's very cunning, manipulative, but we don't have a lot of him. Like there's very little of him in the movie itself, and then we have the end sequence, which is kind of dumb. I came in at the end when Ron was finishing it. It was, and you, Skywalker, will be watching your career with a great interest. Yeah, that's, that was a very corny, poorly written line.
Yeah.
But it kind of goes back into here he is, he's met this character, and that ultimately becomes his right hand.
Right.
But how we get to that point. So very small segments. He's not in the movie a lot, very little dialogue, but what he has is so pivotal in creating the character that we see, in the sequels, in the next two prequels.
Yeah.
But what we ultimately get in Return of the Jedi, the Emperor himself and how cunning he is there. But the other two, so Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan together, I think if you take them apart, they're both terrible characters in this movie, but the way they piggyback off of each other. So, I always viewed Qui-Gon as kind of like the father. Granted, he's the master and Obi-Wan's the Padawan, but I view Qui-Gon more as a father-son character to Obi-Wan. And the way they interact, Obi-Wan is very straight by the books. He does what the Order asks, and you don't see a lot of that in the movie. It's a little bit more in the books. And there's actually another book out that I haven't had a chance to read called Master and Apprentice, and it's about Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. It's actually before Phantom Menace, but Obi-Wan is a very strict by the book Jedi, Padawan at this point. He's not even a Jedi; he's just a Padawan.
Yeah.
Where Qui-Gon is very, he's loose. He's not, he's a Jedi, but he could be an early generation of what a gray Jedi becomes down the road. He doesn't necessarily believe that the Council is right and everything they do is the correct way of doing it. The being able to bend but not break. He bends their rules but not necessarily breaks their rules, and just here's the chosen one. I want to train him. Saying Obi-Wan's good on his own, that sort of thing. But it's those two piggybacking off of each other. Obi-Wan saying, you could have been on the Council by now, Master, if you would just follow what they say. But Qui-Gon's like, who's to say that what they're doing is necessarily right? So I think those two characters, and granted, there are very big, important characters in the show, or in this movie, but they piggyback so well off of each other and developing each other. Because let's face it, the Obi-Wan we see at this point has only been in A New Hope.
Right.
He wasn't in it much. He's an old groggy man that, help us, Obi-Wan,
Yeah.
So, and then he sacrifices himself to be with Luke throughout the rest of that trilogy. We see a ghost in Empire and Return. So we don't have a lot of Obi-Wan development or character built up in the original trilogy.
Right.
So keep in mind, and yes, we have 2 and 3 coming out, but at this moment, only 1 is out. And so we get how he's very by the books, sort of thing, sort of Padawan. So I don't know. I've always enjoyed, those 3 characters, but again, the Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon are very boring, bad characters without each other. They complement each other very, very well. And they're both very good actors. I think, considering that they weren't they were poorly used, and again, it goes back to the execution of George Lucas, but Qui-Gon to me was kind of the highlight of, he's a great actor, yet he's so bad in this movie acting, and it's not his fault. It's not Ewan McGregor's fault, although Ewan McGregor is the standout through all 3 movies of the best actor by far, especially getting better. He got better as the movies went along. Where to me, again, as the movies got along, it got worse.
As the character got more developed.
Correct.
As the character was given more to do.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I figured when you were, and I agree with what you said about Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, where separately, like, they're not well-developed characters, but that dynamic together, that works. That works. They strengthen each other together than they are separate. I do think so. I figured when you were talking about two characters that work together, I figured when
the pod race announcers.
Well, good lord.
Honestly, I'm sorry.
Okay.
My idiot mind went there. I was like, oh, wait, is he gonna seriously talk about the?
No, God no. Although I love Greg Proops, who's one of the pod race announcers from Whose Line Is It Anyway, and he is hilarious. No, when you were talking about 2 characters that work together, and the first person you brought up was Palpatine, I thought you were going to go with Palpatine and Darth Sidious.
Yeah.
The actual fan menace of the title.
Right.
Like, and the fact of the matter is, it's like that. I didn't even think about Palpatine in this movie, because I mean, we learn more as we get further and further into the prequel. Sort of same with Obi-Wan. We learn a bit more about who they are, who he is, and the more he's given to do, we understand what makes him tick a lot more. But yeah, we do actually. Palpatine is somebody who is reasonably developed in his few scenes in Phantom Menace. My choice is it's my two choices actually are the two most controversial performances in the entire movie.
Here we go.
Anakin, who I think as bad as Jake Lloyd is throughout most of this movie, I feel like as a character is probably one of the most developed as an individual character in the movie by George Lucas. Because that first scene, yes, it is cringeworthy when he asks Padme, "Are you an angel?" It is cringeworthy. Every yippee and oops and all of that comes out of his mouth. But we understand the type of person that he is, and we understand the type of kid that he is, and the fact that he does want to help these people, even though they're complete strangers. And like you start to see the seeds of who Anakin Skywalker is before you start to see the downfall. And so it's very if just that might be some of the strongest bit of writing in the entire movie from Lucas, because of the fact that it's like, well, Anakin's obviously the main character of this 6-film arc. He knows what he wants to project with Anakin. He just doesn't know how to get that out. He just doesn't know how to get that consistently on a regular basis out of the actors he's chosen to play Anakin. And the other one is actually Jar Jar, Ahmed Best. And it's like, I'm not a fan of the choices made when it comes to developing the character or developing the Gungans in terms of the way they speak, in terms of the way they move.
Mm-hmm.
But Ahmed Best does a fantastic job of doing what George Lucas wanted him to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I said this before, and this was a controversial thing when we were doing our commentary. I think that you and Dan, okay, I had always said I always in concept.
Yeah.
I thought the Gungans were pretty cool.
Yeah.
Were a neat concept.
Yes.
In terms of like a race, and like, and you can see there was a lot of thought put into their culture,
right,
and all that. And again, it's and we're going back to that word we keep using over. It's all in execution, and it's like it's all in the writing, and that's the thing. Is like there's a really interesting video on YouTube of, is it Brian Blessed who voiced Boss Nass?
Yes,
and yeah, and there's an interview of him on YouTube. You can go looking for it, of him talking about how he developed Boss Nass with Lucas, and how he was like. And he was like looking. He was actually somebody. He was actually somebody else who had the balls to speak up and say, like, there's some. I'm having some issues with this. Like, and he said, and he looked at like a lot of the Jar Jar's dialogue, and he's like there's some. I'm not comfortable with this as an actor, as a character. I'm trying to. He was like, George, I'm trying to develop a character with you here.
Right.
And like so on and so forth, and like you can listen to him talking about how he developed Boss Nass with Lucas, like, right. And how he made he addressed the problematic dialogue. He addressed the dialogue that like is kind of it's for lack of a better, it's childish. It's kind of it's and it's a little racist, So and he addressed all the in the video. You hear him talking about, like, he addressed these things with Lucas. He's like, I need to be saying words. You know, I get that you want this to be an alien, exotic creature character,
Right.
but I need to be using words that still resonate with, you know, a regular audience. I need to be like saying, maybe we start being friends, you know, something like he's like, I need to be using words that resonate with an audience, you know, that like people are going to understand, that people are going to like, you know, and that's why Boss Nass is actually a better character than Jar Jar, you know, like I just think I thought that was really interesting when I found that video. I think I shared it on Facebook. I tagged you guys, but we never really discussed it or anything like that.
No, we haven't.
But yeah, go looking for it. It's really interesting. Yeah. It's a really interesting little slice of nugget of you know, making of this movie that wasn't addressed when the movie first came out. Again, that documentary.
Well, actually, well, and the thing is,
the documentary is very kind of like, you know, again, it's George Lucas being surrounded by yes men. It's kind of like yeah, we're making a star, you know, and it wasn't until years and years later that people started discussing, you know, again, some of the issues that actually happen, you know, behind the scenes.
Actually, I disagree with that. There were people who brought up the issues of.
Well, yeah, again, like
especially with Jar Jar being sort of the Stephen Fetchit, stereotypical, you know, sort of almost like a minstrel show, and that type of characterization of the character. And then you had the Trade Federation, who's very obviously, you know, very clearly Asian accents. And I mean, we talked about this a little bit on the commentary that we did at the time. And it is one I don't remember ever watching that video of Brian Blessed talking about Boss Nass. It does make me want to see that.
You should.
And the thing is, it's like I feel like so much of it didn't occur to me until Ahmed Best started talking about the vitriol that he
all the backlash
faced,
that,
I mean, basically almost drove him to suicide. Like, and you know, it drove Jake Lloyd out of the business entirely.
Oh God, yeah, that is so sad.
That type of, and it's like this, the toxicity of Star Wars, of really any fandom. I mean, all fandoms basically face this now, but I mean, Star Wars, it feels like it's a little bit more pronounced. You know, that, you know, drives somebody like Kelly Marie Tran off of social media. That drives Daisy Ridley off of social media. And it's like, for these specific reasons that people dislike their
yeah, it's not Kelly Marie Tran's fault that Rose's character sucks. It's not her fault. It's
but the fact of the matter is, it's like there's so much, but there's so many. It's not just about the fact that people dislike her character, though. It's the fact that people are bringing out really toxic and even racial hatred towards her, and like Ahmed Best, it's like people blamed him for Jar Jar, and it's like, you were just doing what George asked you to do. And to your credit, it's like you actually did it really. The way you performed physically is fantastic. I mean, the physical performance that he brings to Jar Jar, it's like, you know, Andy Serkis is basically the crown prince of performance capture. Ahmed Best predated him as Jar Jar in terms of performance capture. Now, it was perfected by what Peter Jackson and them did on the Lord of the Rings trilogy with
Gollum.
The way they did performance capture. I mean, basically what Ahmed Best was doing was the way they did performance capture was he was basically the inspiration for the digital animators for the way they did the character. Because, I mean, all three of us have seen the suit that that Ahmed Best wears, where it's like, it's not a performance capture suit the way we think it is.
Yeah.
It's basically a point of reference suit where his performance is the reference for the animators and the CDRs to create that performance.
Yeah, and I loved when Brian, I know Brian watched the episode 1 panel from Celebration this year.
Yeah,
I don't know if you saw Daniel.
Well, same thing with the Rise of Skywalker. So you're talking about, Ahmed Best comes out and he gets a huge standing ovation, longer than any of the others. And same thing with Rise of Skywalker. Kelly Tran had the largest standing ovation out of the entire Rise of Skywalker. Even when Lando came out, he probably had the next biggest. But Kelly Marie. Yeah. So it's one of those. Yeah, the fandom is very toxic in any fandom. I think part of it is social media is so much different now than social media. So social media when Phantom Menace was there was MySpace, right? I mean, I think MySpace. I don't know. There wasn't a lot of social media per se. It was early form.
It was basically just web pages and message boards.
Yeah,
is what basically was.
And chat rooms.
I mean, and Facebook was or MySpace and
was
Facebook
it was actually
I mean, this was AOL, right?
These was message boards.
Yeah,
so
message boards and chat rooms. Yeah.
So it's the toxicity is a lot worse now.
And it's so much more instant now. Yeah. That's another scary thing.
The other thing too is I don't know. A lot of times we sit here and say the fans hate it, but like I'm surrounded with people. Ronnie doesn't like The Last Jedi, but he has some valid points. But I don't know of anybody that like is a Star Wars fan that truly, truly, truly hated it. There was points and moments you didn't like. I think the people that didn't like it are just the standard moviegoers that are just going to be entertained, and they weren't fulfilled. Their entertainment was not satisfied, and they're the ones that I think that do more complaining, more so than the Star Wars fans or the Star Trek fans or the Harry Potter fans.
It's like I feel like so many of the people who do some of the loudest complaining about Star Wars, and especially the prequel trilogy and the sequel trilogy, are people from Ron and mine's generation of original generation Star Wars fans, where we had very particular ideas in our head of how the prequels and how the sequels should go. And when they didn't live up to those expectations, they got pissy about it. They got overly pissy about it. And it's like, as opposed to adapting and kind of, even if they don't, like Ron, I mean, we give you a lot of crap for your dislike of The Last Jedi, but ultimately, like Daniel said, we both understand what you don't like about it, and it's perfectly valid criticisms of a film. It's not like, oh my god, he ruined my childhood. Like, the Phantom Menace and the prequel trilogies were the whole, you ruined my childhood generation started. And it's like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, this is the most juvenile, and people saying George Lucas raped my childhood. It's like, first of all, you're insensitive as fuck if that's the way you're going to put it. Secondly, it's like, no, he didn't. You can still watch those original movies if you want. Well, more or less.
Yeah,
we're not going to go into that.
No, we weren't. No, we let's
Blu-ray
not.
Special
Let's
edition,
not.
Ice batting Ewok. Yeah.
We're not going to go into.
No.
I will admit, like when we watched the trilogy, because I still don't have the Blu-rays, but when we watched that, I'll admit it's like it still wasn't great, but wasn't quite as bad as I expected that to be. It's still not good. But it's not as cringeworthy as I thought it was going to be. But yeah, I mean, it's like the prequels were and especially Phantom Menace, were ground zero for the worst of Star Wars. Now, it's like the people who go to Star Wars Celebration, I feel like they're representative of the best of Star Wars fandom.
Yeah.
It's like, even if they don't necessarily love everything about Star Wars, they want to celebrate Star Wars.
Yeah.
It's like, that's what it doesn't matter if they like everything about it. It's like they just want to celebrate this thing they love.
Yeah.
Amen.
And so,
sure. Good point.
and so it's not surprising to me that Ahmed Best gets a standing ovation, especially given how honest and just how passionate he still remains about that character. And the fact of the matter is, there are still a lot of fans of that character. You know, from when they were kids, it's like they may not necessarily, and they didn't necessarily know at the time the issues that other people would have with that character. It's like they saw him. That was, it's a goofy character. And it's like Jar Jar does point to one of the things I was talking about earlier I was going to talk about earlier when we debated whether it was a kid's movie or not. It's like the fundamental problem with Jar Jar, one of the fundamental problems with Jar Jar, other than the voice and all of that, is the fact that it's a particularly juvenile brand of humor that Jar Jar is involved with. And it's like, there's humor in the original trilogy. C-3PO and R2-D2 are great examples. But it's not as juvenile, stupid kids humor as what Jar Jar is. And what Jar Jar represents. And that's one of my biggest problems with the character, is that it's forced humor, and it's not particularly funny humor. Because it's like, oh, I stepped in doo-doo. It's like, oh, God, you're kidding me.
Well, and we Brian and I have both talked. The Clone Wars does Jar Jar a huge favor and make him a better character. So you have Jar Jar of Phantom Menace, Attack of Clones, what little he's in there, and then Revenge of the Sith. But then you have the Jar Jar that's in the Clone Wars, who is not a different character. He's still the same character, but he's a better developed character, and he has better. He's better used, by Dave Filoni and George Lucas do a better job of using this character and kind of redeeming it, if you will.
A big part of it is not only Filoni being the big point man there, but also the fact that it's those other voices coming in, the different writers who are going to have their own ideas on how Jar Jar should be represented, the way he should be written, and it's like and all of those in concerts, like, I do feel like with the Clone Wars is the best. The Clone Wars series is the best thing that came out of the prequels.
Yeah, agreed.
The prequel era. It really is, because it feels more like the Star Wars that we grew up with. I mean, it took a little bit to get going, but it feels like the Star Wars that we grew up with.
But for kids. Really designed for kids.
But also just that adventure, while also deepening a lot of the mysteries of the Force, and with some really audacious ideas. Like there are arcs of Jedi. There are Jedi arcs in that series that are just out there, completely out there. And the same thing with Rebels was the same way when after Disney took over, it was the same thing. Like it was basically different filmmakers, different artists bring their own sensibilities to this franchise, and it's like that's the big thing. That's ultimately the biggest thing that holds the prequels back. And it's like it makes you wonder because Ron Howard was one of the people that George Lucas talked to about directing Phantom Menace. What if he had said yes? I think we would have gotten a better. I think the performances certainly would have been better. Ron Howard is a really good director of actors. I think maybe the writing still wouldn't have been too great, but maybe he could have gotten George to bring somebody else in to co-write the script. I was thinking about this evening, sort of watching what I did of Phantom Menace. It's like, what if he had offered it to Coppola? What if he had offered the prequels to Coppola? And it's like, if you think about the Godfather trilogy, it wouldn't be an out there idea. And like they both have been proponents of technology in movies for ever since they've known each other. And by that point, Coppola was, Coppola had was about to. Coppola wasn't really making films at that point, so it's like he could have done some interesting things with the political parts of this movie. He probably wouldn't have made his the humor in this movie wouldn't have been as juvenile. Maybe he could have gotten something out of these actors that Coppola or Lucas just was not really able to do. I mean, it's it's interesting to think of what could have been with the prequels, but you get an idea with the Clone Wars of what could have been.
Mm-hmm.
And if other voices had been brought in, and I one of the biggest problems with Lucas, as as much as I'm appreciative of him for creating Star Wars and the universe that Star Wars exhibits, he the fact that he felt like he had to do it all by himself with the prequels. I kind of understand why. I mean, he's kind of said why because of the fact that it's like he had his own very strong ideas as far as the visual effects and what he wanted to do as far as that. But if he had been able to just relinquish a little bit of control, to different filmmakers. And it's like, I mean, he had Spielberg in helping with pre-visualization of sequences in Revenge of the Sith.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like, those are some of the best sequences in Revenge of the Sith. And, yeah, I mean, God, we've talked a lot about this movie. We haven't even touched on.
I think we touched on some interesting parts though. I think I think it's overall it's really been an interesting discussion. I think.
And the thing is like there's so much to talk about Phantom Menace, and it's like it's a movie that represents it does represent a very particular. I mean, one of the most interesting things it's fundamentally a generic Hollywood blockbuster when you boil it down in a lot of ways. It's also as audacious and expanding of the art form as something like The Matrix or something like Fight Club or The Blair Witch Project or some of these other movies in 1999 where they take chances and they also don't really care what you think about them. It's like, this is the movie that I made. You may like some things about it, you may not like other things about it, but it's like, this is the way I made it. And George Lucas, for all of his faults as a filmmaker, is a filmmaker who is he is a substantial filmmaker, regardless of how good some of his movies are. And that's just the bottom line. I mean, are any of the prequels as good as THX 1138 or American Graffiti or New Hope? No, not by a long shot. But they're still you can still tell the same voice is throughout all of those movies. And it took a while. It took a little too long with the prequels, I think, for Lucas to find that voice again of what made those first three films so special and entertaining in order to bring that to his later work. So, but yeah, we've touched on a lot. I mean, we didn't even really mention Natalie Portman as Padme. I mean, you mentioned Ewan McGregor, and yeah, he definitely got better as the franchise got along. It's like there are so many other things we could talk.
Natalie Portman never seemed like she was invested in that character at all. I don't throughout the whole trilogy. That's the thing. I mean,
yeah, I mean, for a while I thought she was good in it, but it's like, yeah, you can tell that she's not too terribly invested in it. You're right. I mean, I think she's an actor who's doing the best she can with material that is just not really playing to her strengths.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you sort of see that in the Thor movies too.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I mean, I think she's a little bit more natural in those.
Yeah.
And especially the first one. But
I thought she was a little bit. I thought that's the thing. Like Dark again. I thought Dark World was better just because it's just I don't know. Just
yeah. See, Dark World didn't really hold up for me.
that's I think that's the thing. Like is it a great movie? No, but it does it. I think it holds up a little bit better than the first Thor. That's but we're getting off track.
Yeah, we're getting off track. But,
I think it's interesting. So Keira Knightley was the backup.
Yeah.
Keira Knightley played Sabe, who is the decoy. They're actually all. There's a book called Queen of Shadows, which is fantastic. It talks about all the handmaidens, and they're all decoys, and they all have a particular role and how they dress up Queen Amidala, whether it's the decoy version or not, and how they all interact. They all have the same attitude, personality, speech, and then the reason they wear so much makeup is to hide who it actually is. Right. But I actually find it funny that Natalie Portman was the main character in Padme, but I felt like Keira Knightley actually could have done a better job, and the Keira Knightley we have in the few moments of her actually being dressed up as the decoy, Padme, Queen Amidala aspect, I felt she was a better actor for the role. I felt like she could have done better. There are way better actresses that could have been out there and could have been utilized, but specifically that those two were cast. Yeah. Because they were bigger names at the time,
let's think like
credits, but was not.
Keira
didn't become a big name until Pirates of the Caribbean.
It's true.
But no, that's the thing. Natalie Portman was was kind of like she was the big young actress at the time.
Yeah.
That she was a name. Like she had recognition.
She'd been in a few pretty big movies or bigger movies.
Mm-hmm.
She had worked with Woody Allen and a bunch of other directors at the time.
Yeah, but I just always thought it'd be kind of interesting, like how would that character have developed over the trilogy if it was Keira Knightley as the main role versus Natalie Portman? I felt like we would have gotten a better character, better. Obviously the acting did get better, even from Natalie Portman. I felt like she did get better as the trilogy went on, but I don't think hers didn't improve enough that her character and the acting was a good choice.
That's actually interesting, and it's like I do think to a certain extent she probably would have been better, and I think part of it is because of the fact that she's so well suited for period movies. Like she's like Keira Knightley. Some of the most substantial movies she's done has been period movies, whether it's like Pride and Prejudice or Atonement or other movies. So it's like she's more suited for that type of thing. Natalie Portman really isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like that might be part of the reason why Natalie Portman is just, she doesn't, like, she's not quite as natural in that, because you're right, actually, thinking about it, it's like, yeah, Keira Knightley in that role, when you do see her as the queen, it's like she does project a little bit more of that type of character than Natalie Portman does. And it's like Natalie Portman, and it's funny, Natalie Portman is so recognizable. I can't get over on the riff tracks for her. It's like, she's the queen, guys. She's the queen. Like, it's obvious she's the queen. But yeah. But I agree. This was a really good conversation. I'll close up and leave it to you guys if you guys have anything more you want to add before we sign off here.
I mean, I really don't. I mean, like it's been neat to listen to you guys, and you're. I mean, I actually do, and I give Daniel a hard time for being such a bookworm, but at the same time, I really do appreciate where he's coming from with his point of view, being as well read with the expanded universe as he is, because he does offer a. Because that's the thing, like you and I, Brian, we're not invested in the aspects of the books as much, if at all. So it's always neat to listen to what Daniel has to say and the point of view he brings, as someone who's invested in the books. And I just thought you, Brian, actually brought up some really interesting points. It's always Interesting to hear what you have to say. And again, I'm just over here. I'm more or less just kind of like soaking in a lot of what you guys have to say. I'm not sure I've had a lot to bring to the table as far as like what's new or what's interesting, but it's been fun to discuss this with. It's been fun to discuss Star Wars with you guys to the extent we have over the last couple of years. It's been a lot of fun to like bring Daniel into the mix and like even when we get into these text meme wars on our phones. That's been my favorite part. Has been getting to the meme wars with you guys of like but.
Well, I think the most fascinating thing about this for me, Ron, and I mean, this was originally going to be Daniel and I, but Ron really wanted to be in this, and the more I thought about it, the more it's like, yeah, he really does need to be in this.
Wait, you were considering doing this without me, Brian? When was this? You never.
It's over and done.
Has been. This has been.
Here.
You're here.
I'm sorry.
You got airtime. Your name's.
I don't know how to feel about this, Brian.
I'm sorry.
You should be.
But the fact of the matter is, it's like what's interesting for me, especially since the fact that we've been talking about these movies since 2003, because we did our commentaries for the prequels starting in 2003, and so hearing us, I know for me, my opinion of Phantom Menace has changed kind of drastically. I mean, I still kind of feel like I have some of the same feelings about the movie that I've always had, but just the way I weigh things is considerably different now. And so the fact that we can continue this discussion, there's still so much to talk about and so much that can be added to this discussion is fascinating. And it's like I'm glad that we continue this, and I'm glad that we have Daniel that we can also bring into this conversation and add his perspective to it. Because I mean, I've been talking about been talking about Star Wars with you for almost 20 years now, and so it's like to bring somebody else in who's as big a fan, if not more of a fan of this.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure Daniel's the biggest fan of the.
On the basis of the fact that he's more the books, and the
oh my god! Well, that's the thing. Daniel's extent of the knowledge and of the lore. It really.
It's fantastic.
It really is kind of impressive in its own way. And I do kind of think Daniel's probably the biggest fan in this room.
Oh yeah,
I'm pretty sure.
So I might have a lot of knowledge, but I've still never won Star Wars trivia in a group environment. Like I've won the Trivial Pursuit all day, every day. But yeah, I mean, there's nerds out there bigger than I am too.
Yeah,
so.
I remember that one night of Star Wars trivia we did a few years ago.
A Battle and Brew.
Yeah. Oh, on Star Wars Day.
Star Wars Day, and we
brutal.
We had a rough time.
Oh yeah. I enjoyed my alcoholic blue milk, but that's all I remember.
But Daniel, do you have anything?
The only thing that I would leave on is just a small tidbit of an actor that was like we didn't talk about yet, and don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But Ray Park as Darth Maul was kind of like the Harrison Ford Han Solo, where they weren't cast. Ray Park was just a stunt double or stunt not stunt double. He was actually a stunt. I forgot what they used him for, but he was just providing stunts for the original actor that was cast to do, but he did such a better job and was so natural and fluent that they aired him. Kind of same thing with Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford wasn't supposed to get anything. He was just doing line readings, and actually he did some of the building, as I recall, because he was a carpenter at the time. I think he did some of the set buildings. But anyways, just an actor that very little airtime, and another character, a Darth Maul had very little movie screen time that was like by all fans, even still today, is next to Darth Vader probably the most loved and unique Sith Lord that we got that we don't know anything about, or very little about in terms of the movie. Obviously, comics, books, tons of knowledge, that sort of stuff, and Clone Wars and Rebels and Solo. But his character, I mean, look at this one character he had. I think it was less than a minute of total airtime in Phantom Menace. But look at the character they
I think he had one line.
Yeah, and the fight scenes.
At
yeah.
last, we reveal
But-
ourselves
yeah,
to the
he has
Jedi. At
one
last, we'll
line.
have revenge.
But look at the character he developed because of it. Because the fans loved him and they killed him too quickly. Boom, here he is again. So
Yeah.
But that's all I was gonna just I
No,
can't
when
leave
we
Ray
were
Park out.
watching the movie earlier, and Obi-Wan kills Darth Maul, we're like, well, we'll never see him again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Nope.
No,
So-
and I remember and Ray Park was on. Yeah, he was on the 20th anniversary panel as well at
Mhm.
Star Wars
Yeah.
Celebration.
Yep.
But we saw him at Celebration a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
and that was we saw Ian McDiarmid there too.
Yeah. Ian McDermott.
Yeah, that was fantastic. So, no, and yeah, I mean, this is there's always going to be so much to talk about when it comes to the Fan Menace. I mean, there's so much that I took notes on that I'm leaving on the table. Like, we haven't talked about some of the other ideas there, but I'm not even going to bring them.
I was going to say, make sure to bring up our commentary as a companion piece
Oh, yeah.
to this.
And I mean, it's going to be linked to. But yeah, I mean, the commentary that Ron, Dave, and I did for all of the prequels and as well as A New Hope are available on Sonic Cinema, and you'll be able to listen to it there. I'll link to it when I post this, and I definitely hope you check that out. I mean, it just plays like a normal commentary, or you can listen to it individually. You know, you're just gonna have a lot of pauses there, but yeah. So thank you to Daniel Green and Ryan Haynes for joining me tonight to talk about The Phantom Menace and continue the discussion of the class of 1999 with me. Hit me up on patreon.com/SonicCinema for more. And check out the Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube page for more, including our discussions on The Last Jedi and Star Wars in general. And for now, this is Brian Scuttle for Sonic Cinema and the Sonic Cinema Podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you.